Good evening. Welcome to my talk. First one ever. In fact, it's the first talk I've ever been to. So go easy on me. My talk is entitled Yet Another Form Library. My name is Stu. And this is the GitHub repo link. If you're interested, my Twitter, you can be like the 8th person to follow me. And then Trent's Twitter account handle there. Okay, so my talk is going to be about a library that I created. It's called YAFL, Yet Another Form Library, or YAFL's Another Form Library. It's sort of going to be a mixed mode presentation. I sort of tell you a little bit about the headspace I was in at the time and some retrospective sort of like learnings that I had, and maybe some demos. Well, definitely some demos. Hopefully we have time. Hopefully I don't completely mess up and then go over time. But yeah, so what is YAFL? YAFL's a form library. Anyone worked with forms over here? Yeah? So it's not just me. Okay, wait, first, even rewind. Who over here is a front-end developer? Yeah? Who over here is using React? Okay, that's cool. That means some people know what I'm talking about. Who over here has used a form library of any kind? Okay, cool. Let's move on then. Oh, actually, I got this. This is cool. No hands. Okay, so YAFL is similar to the likes of Redux Form, Formic. Do these ring any bells? Anyone use these libraries? Yeah? Formic? Redux Form? Yeah? Both? Which one do you guys prefer? Formic? Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully by the end of this evening, maybe there'll be like a third one in the running with like, we'll see. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones too. Like NPM is littered with them. There's literally more form libraries on NPM than there are any other library. I'm pretty sure of it. YAFL, the library I've created, is far more closely related to Redux Form. Cancel that. I'm nervous. Formic. Because it has no sort of external dependencies on a state management library like Redux Form does. So you might at this point be asking yourselves, like, why did I do it? We certainly didn't need another form library. Formic is growing strong. Redux Form has, again, hundreds of thousands of monthly downloads. Great community support, all that sort of stuff. So did we need another form library? Probably not, but that didn't stop me from creating one. So why did I do it? The fact is, I didn't actually have much of a reason. At the time, this was earlier this year, around Easter time. I think it was April. That's when Easter is, right? I was in Cape Town. I've just moved to London, by the way, fresh off the boat. And I was on holiday with my girlfriend, and at the time, React 16.3 was coming out, and I was really, really excited to get working with the new context API. Of everyone here, has anyone used new context API? Okay, awesome, relief. And like I was really excited. But I was being a good boyfriend. I left all my work stuff at home in Johannesburg, and I went to Cape Town without my computer. But all the stuff was happening in the sort of JavaScript space, in the React space, and so I was like glued to my mobile phone, and that sounds really depressing. But I was like reading all these blog posts and these tutorials, and sort of like getting really amped to try out this new API, because I'd been using the old one and sort of ignoring the warnings that were attached to the documentation. I never used it in production, I promise. Or I do know a few people who might shout at me for saying that. But anyway, so I got back to Joburg a couple days later, and finally I was able to sit in front of my laptop and try out the context API, which I was looking forward to. And I sort of sat there and I was like, what am I going to do? What can I build that's going to use this thing? And at the time I was sort of using a lot of forms, as we do as front-end developers. So I thought, okay, I'm going to build a form library, I guess. And that sounds really boring, and I promise you it is. But then some good stuff happened and sort of it turned out not to be so boring. So just a little bit of background on forms and form libraries and why they exist. I think at the core of forms is user experience, right? Like, so creating a good user experience is really difficult, especially when it comes to forms. Forms, it turns out, are really actually quite difficult. You have to be sympathetic to the user's feelings. You don't want to like shout at them too quickly, otherwise you might just come across as patronizing. But you also don't want to shout at them too late. Like we've all like filled out a application form, or you're booking a flight, right? And then you get to the bottom of the page and you hit submit or like pay now or something, and then like nothing happens. And then you scroll back to the top and you see the red writing that's like, and you're like, oh my, okay. Then you correct the mistake and then you do it, and it's just like a disaster. Really bad user experience, and at that point you might just like jump over onto like some other better designed website. So it's really important for the user experience to create a good form library. And because of all of those reasons, it becomes more of a developer experience problem. You have to keep track of a lot of state. You need to know what fields users visited, what they've changed, and obviously what like things they've gone and messed up, right? Like you need to know if like an email address is valid and all that sort of stuff. So to put that in context of YAFL and my experiences with it. So for those people who don't know what context is, or the React Context API, essentially what it is it's a way to pass data from one component to another through your component tree without having to do it explicitly through a technique that's sort of become famously known as prop drilling. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah. So essentially, you're able to get a prop to a child component without having to pass it through explicitly. And that's using a technique called magic. Okay, so I had created this form library, and what I had done essentially was I had two components. Essentially, it was very, very basic. I had a form, and that was took the place of the provider, and it was just passing state down to state and methods and that sort of thing to the field components. Very much like the way Formic does it and the way Redux Form does it. And that sort of looked very much like this. So I had the form. It was super simple. At the time, I was also getting started with TypeScript, and I'd like really gone down the rabbit hole of like I really wanted it to be a type-safe experience. I became sort of obsessed with types, and I kind of still am. But anyway, so I didn't want the user to have to type in field name equals surname because it was actually supposed to be last name. I wanted the IntelliSense to be able to like pick that up and throw red squiggly lines all over the place. And I got that working. It was really cool, and I was super stoked. I was really proud of myself. Then I decided to try it out in real life, with some like real life data. And this was the first call. Like literally, it wasn't quite this, but it was pretty close. This was some data coming back from a REST API, and I was looking at it, and my heart sunk. I was just like, oh my god, I've missed something. Looking at this, so this is what I had. Can you see what I might have missed out? Like what omissions I made?
Personal.
Pardon?
Personal details. The mapping of the personal, as in person to personal.
Well, it was more a complexity problem. Like I hadn't thought of nested fields. Like I hadn't even thought that there could be like values attached to a field that were slightly more complex than a string or a number or a Boolean. And it was at that point I was just like, I shouldn't be a developer. I am the worst developer ever. How did I forget that? Like how? And anyway, so I was just feeling really, really despondent. I parked it. I sort of went and had a couple drinks, and I came back to it a couple days later. And I was looking at this response that I was getting from the API, and I was trying to think, how can I make this work with what I've done without throwing away literally everything, because it was like so fundamentally my code was so fundamentally unequipped to deal with this like only slightly complex data, you know. So I was looking at it, and I was staring at it for the longest time, and what sort of started popping out was that hiding in plain sight was a form nested within the form. There's a contact form right there, right? And you know, the same goes for addresses. There's an addresses form right there. And that was sort of like the light bulb moment for me. I sort of went from here, where I had this like, you know, form provider and a field consumer. And I was like, okay, what would happen if I just like, you know, said, okay, I've got this contact field, and I'll just like say there's a form inside the contact, and the contact field is a form in and of itself. And inside that, we've got a, you know, address form. And on that, then we've got the address fields. And to me, like that seemed like, okay, that seems pretty reasonable. I wonder what, you know, and what happens if I nest a consumer inside a provider, inside a consumer, inside a provider of the same type. I looked online, I went into like the React docs, I couldn't see anything that said don't do this. I couldn't see, I was like Stack Overflow, like GitHub issues, nothing, you know. So I was like, okay, I guess I can do this. And I promise you, it was a lot uglier than this, but it actually worked. Like I was actually able to like have this sort of this structure where what happened was I let, you know, an on-change event sort of bubble values up to the top form and change it. It was ugly, you know, really, really disgusting, but that was the sort of light bulb moment for me. And I thought to myself, if only I had a way to sort of like componentize this. And luckily we're using React, so that's exactly what I did. I just said, okay, put that form and that field into the into one component. And it was slightly like more complex than that. I did have to do a lot of rewriting. You guys are welcome to go look at the commit history. It's disgusting. Lots of trial and error. But finally I arrived at this. And all this time, and I still am to a certain extent, sort of going like, I wonder if this is a good idea. But it was pretty interesting. And this is sort of how YAFL works, is basically I've got this provider. It passes data to its nearest consumer or to a consumer using magic. And then the next consumer then manually passes props down to the following provider of this, or the next provider of the same type. I don't know if you're following me, but that's essentially what happens. And then that provider then uses its magic to pass props down to any other consumers. And that sort of looks like this, right? I've got a section, and a section's called contact, and it has another section inside it called address, and one inside that, and that's a field, and that's your street name, right? And that all sort of looks like that. I spent a long time on that slide. Like a really long time. I think more time than it took to do any of the other ones altogether. So what? What does that actually mean for somebody using YAFL? It's actually pretty cool. So for one thing, if you used Redux Form or Formic, you've probably used string paths before. String paths is how Formic and Redux Form create that depth, create nested fields. So what you would do is you would say field and you'd give it a name, and that would be address dot or contact dot address dot street name, right? And that's cool. It allows you to sort of define that depth, but you lose a lot of things. Do you know what you lose when you use string paths? Like one really important one.
Type safety.
Type safety is one. And that's a good one. I had to give that up. But I think it was for a good reason. Another thing you lose is the ability to refactor your code. So say your API endpoint changes, and now you're like, okay, well now my address is actually not on my contact anymore. It's just like straight on the like root object. Now I have to go change a whole bunch of strings. That's like really, really horrible. Working with strings in general is just like the worst. So that sort of brings me to the next one, which is about another benefit, which is it allows me to structure my components to match the shape of the API endpoint that I'm calling. So instead of using strings, I just like structure my components in the same way that the data looks, and it just works. So refactoring becomes as simple as just like highlighting the piece of code and option up, option down, and it just works. It's no longer do I have to go and cut and paste strings and do any of that sort of thing. It's also really, really fast. I'll show you a demo of that in a second. It's type safe for the most part, but it's also, like, I think, a lot more fun than working with, Redux form or Formic. It's super, super easy. It's also really flexible. It's got a smaller footprint than the likes of both Redux form and Formic. And now this was the slide that would have to remind me to show you a demo. So that's what I'm going to do now. So to start off with, let me show you. Okay, let's show you this. This is on the GitHub page. This is linked to on the README, so you're welcome to go check this out. But this is sort of just like showing you the updates that are happening behind the scenes. You would expect this to happen if you're using Redux form or Formic. But there's a couple interesting things here that I chose to do slightly differently, more on like a philosophical side. For example, validation. Validation with Formic and Redux form is done only at a certain point. So like when you blur a field, for example, then it will go and validate it. And you can specify when you want a field to be validated. But that's wrong, right? It just is. If you're filling out an application form, or if you're writing a test and you hand the test in, you didn't complete section B, do you get the marks because you didn't complete it? Like, it's invalid, right? It's not invalid because you didn't see it yet. It's just invalid. And so what you can see over here is there's an error count field. Let me sort of highlight that. And you can see there are 4 errors on this form, even though I haven't visited those fields. And that's a really important note. And one of the reasons why these libraries don't do it is for performance reasons. But YAFL doesn't suffer from those. So let's take a look at a performance test. Here's an example with Formic. It's a really big form. Please don't ever make a form that has 1,600 input fields. I promise you, you will be fired. Okay, so let's write something. Okay, I just wrote hello world. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. That would have been more cool to see just pop up. There you go. So you can see that was quite long. I was told to shorten the string that or the input I was going to write because it can take a really long time. Here's YAFL with the same number of fields. Right. So and validation's happening in here as well as I go. Look, oh, MongoDB. Why did that come? Yep. Cool. Sorry, I forgot the mic. Yeah. So there you can see that it's slightly faster, and yeah. So let me go back to the slides. There's very few left. I think maybe one. So should you use YAFL? Sure, why not? Just go ahead. There are some things that I really, really want to get around to implementing. It's lacking tests. It's difficult to say yes definitively. I'm still not sure whether what I've done is like good practice. I would love some feedback. I actually did write Dan Abramoff, the creator of Redux, to sort of ask him. I said, take a look at this code. Like, what do you think? And he was really kind enough to write back and sort of say, sounds like a good idea. And I was just like, awesome. He didn't look at the code, but he said he wasn't familiar with the problem space, and I respect that. I was just like stoked he even replied. But yeah. If you want to, go check it out. I would love you to. Give me some feedback. And if you want to start working on it, like, hey, I'll make you a contributor, like, that would be awesome. This is the most people that have ever even heard of it. I've showed it to very few people, literally to Trint only. I was even able to sneak it into an MR, and only everybody noticed. But it's still there, so, yay. Yep, and that's my talk. I do have another slide if I run out of time, but it says, oh, that isn't even the time I'm looking at. That's the actual time, not how many minutes I've been talking for. Okay, anyway, I won't get onto that because I'm sure I'm over time. I don't know how long I've been going for, but if you want to talk to me about it, come to me after this. Thank you very much.